International. First, the top stories of the news. Army General Say Changriha, Chief of Staff of the People's National Army ANP, will begin an official visit to Russia on Monday at the invitation of Army General Shoigu Sergeyev, Minister of Defense of the Russian Art Federation. The ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Algeria, Li Jian, said on Sunday that the state visit recently paid by the President of the Republic, Mr. Majid Tebboune, to China had been a success at all levels. And as the Economic Community of West African States, ECOMOG, and several other countries call for restoration of the constitutional order in Niger, Germany today announced it suspended its development aid to the country. These are the major developments, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. This is Mohammed Badazwan reporting. First, in our news file, Army General Say Changriha, Chief of Staff of the People's National Army ANP, will begin an official visit to Russia on Monday at the invitation of Army General Shoigu Sergeyev, Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Ministry of National Defense, MDN, said in a statement. The visit, which falls within the framework of strengthening cooperation between the National People's Army and the Russian Armed Forces, will enable the two sides to examine issues of common concern. In other topical news, the ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Algeria, Li Jian, said on Sunday that the state visit recently paid by the President of the Republic, Mr. Majid Tebboune, to China had been a success at all levels, further strengthening the depth of the relations of friendship and cooperation between the two friendly countries. Speaking at a press conference at the headquarters of the Chinese embassy in Algiers, the diplomat said that President Tebboune's visit to China was historic, successful at every level, and will help to deepen the solid relations of friendship and cooperation between the two countries. Several mega projects will be carried out in the future between Algeria and China, notably in the field of infrastructure, he added. After recalling a warm welcome given to the President of the Republic in China, Mr. Li Jian stressed the importance of the talks between President Tebboune and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, which had enabled them to review the various regional and international issues of common concern. In this context, he said that the two presidents have stressed the importance of finding political and peaceful solutions to the Palestinian issue, as well as to the situation in Yemen, Syria, Mali, and Sudan. The Chinese ambassador said that his country's position on the Sahrawi issue, supporting the efforts of the United Nations to find a peaceful and just solution to this issue, has not changed, as mentioned in the joint communiqué issued at the end of President Tebboune's state visit to China. Following Algiers' election as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, the two countries' foreign ministers will intensify their cooperation to establish peace in the world, he added. Speaking at the news conference, the Chinese ambassador reiterated his country's support for Algeria's membership of the BRICS group, praising the progress made by Algeria recently under the wise leadership of President Abdelmajid Tebboune. In other news, Professor Noordin Yassa has been elected by a large majority of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, to the position of chairman of Working Group 3 on Mitigation in Nairobi, Kenya. The election took place during the first round of voting held from the 25th to the 28th of July on the occasion of the 59th session of the IPCC, a United Nations science body that assesses the state of science, knowledge, and data on climate change. As the Economic Community of West African States, ECOMOG, and several other countries call for restoration of the constitutional order in Niger, Germany today announced it suspended its development aid to the country. The German Foreign Ministry spokesman announced his country's decision to suspend all direct payments to the government of Niger and all development cooperation. The German government said it was examining the whole bilateral engagement in Niger and was considering taking other measures depending on the progress of the situation in the upcoming days. It described the situation in Niger as moving, while underlining that the international community's efforts continue to secure a return to a democratic order. This came as Russia called on all the parties in Niger to show restraint and urge for a return to legality. It urged all the parties to avoid human losses. This came as the member countries of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, meeting in Abuja, Nigeria, agreed on immediate financial sanctions against Niger. They gave 1 week to those behind the recent coup to restore constitutional order and did not exclude a recourse to force. In resolutions read out by Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu, who currently ensures the presidency of the organization, the ECOWAS called for an immediate release of Niger President Mohamed Bazoum, who is detained by his guard members, and for rapid restoration of the constitutional order. This came as the UN Security Council strongly condemned, as it put it, the efforts to unconstitutionally change the legitimate government of Niger. Earlier, the African Union called for the immediate release of Niger President Mohamed Bazoum, detained by his guard members, and urged for a restoration of the constitutional order in the country within 15 days. Let's shift now to the Palestinian equation. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has denounced the international community's inaction and silence over Israel's occupation and repressive policy, saying that it contributed to speed up the Israeli government's vile schemes in the occupied Palestinian territories. It was quoted by the news agency Wafa saying that the international community's silence over Israel's illegal measures encourages the group of Jewish settlers, increases the confiscation of lands, and undermines all peace prospects. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry reiterated that Israel was seeking to devote occupation to speed up the annexation of the West Bank and prevent the creation of an independent Palestinian state with occupied Jerusalem as its capital. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, over 200 Palestinians, including 37 children and 11 women, have been killed by the Israeli soldiers since the beginning of this year. Meanwhile, 7 Palestinians were arrested during operations carried out today by the Israeli occupation army in Hebron and occupied Jerusalem. This came as 2 Palestinians were wounded after the Israeli soldiers assaulted a municipality east of Ramallah. In other news, Sahrawi women celebrated International African Women's Day on Monday as they excel in resisting the great challenges imposed by Moroccan occupation, which they have sworn to defeat by wresting freedom and independence for their country. Sahrawi women play a pioneering and decisive role in the national liberation struggle, taking the path of resistance and confronting the worst Moroccan practices and violations, as well as educating and protecting the different generations, in addition to their contribution to the edification process. Concerning Libya, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General for Libya, Abdullah Batili, has affirmed that the elections remain the only means of building up a new Libya. In a statement made during a meeting of dignitaries held in Tripoli, he stressed that the UN mission was helping the Libyans to find a solution to the political deadlock. The UN envoy stated that stability would prevail in Libya once a new government was elected, and called on the regional and international parties to back the UN mission in Libya to further its mission aimed at restoring peace and stability in the country. Elsewhere in Pakistan, the death toll in the suicide bomb attack targeting a political rally in the district of Bajor has risen to reach 47. Over 100 people were wounded in the attack, aiming a rally held by a religious body. Responsibility for the ill-fated attack has not been claimed, but the authorities believe it to be the work of the terrorist Daesh group, which activates in the region. You are still tuned to Radio Alger International, and now I invite you to listen to the second part of our edition with two timely broadcasts on schedule. I wish you swell listening.
Hi and welcome to our weekly program devoted to Algerian economic news. First in the news, the acting Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Nuruddin Khandoudi, and the Japanese Ambassador to Algiers, Kono Akira, have signed an agreement to set up a joint Algerian-Japanese Economic Committee. This agreement, which strengthens the legal framework for bilateral cooperation, establishes a consultation mechanism aimed at consolidating economic and trade relations between Algeria and Japan and promoting investment and partnership in areas of common interest in the wake of the promulgation of the new investment code and the improvement of the business climate in Algeria. The first charging station for electric vehicles has gone into service at the Promenade des Sablettes in Algiers as part of Sonelgaz's strategic plan to install 1,000 charging stations by the end of 2024. The program to install charging stations for electric vehicles entrusted to the Sonelgaz Group aims to consolidate and develop the energy transition and promote the use of electric vehicles on the national market. The Minister of Trade and Export Promotion, Tayyip Zitouni, has stressed the need to raise the level of control operations according to a new vision with a view to preventing any illegal activity or monopoly practiced by companies or traders, according to a ministry press release. The minister's statement was made during the installation ceremony of the new Director General of Economic Control and Fraud Repression at the ministry, Mr. Mohamed Mirzgash, the same source said. In a speech delivered on this occasion, the minister reviewed the main plans and measures that will be implemented under the aegis of the new Director General of Economic Control and Fraud Repression, notably in terms of dealing with commercial practices and making them more ethical as part of ongoing efforts to strengthen transparency and probity in the commercial sector. More in our program, a memorandum of understanding has been signed in Algiers between the National Bank of Algeria, BNA, and the General Directorate of Customs for the online payment of taxes via the Moussa Hamatik portal. The memorandum of understanding was signed by the Director General of the BNA, Mohamed Lamin Lebou, and the Director General of Taxes, Amal Abdellatif, under the supervision of the Minister of Finance, Aziz Faid. The aim of the agreement is to launch the e-payment service electronic transfer via an interface that will be created for remote declaration and payment of tax charges on the Moussa Hamatik portal and linked to the BNA's e-banking platform. The digital gallery tracing the various stages through which the Sonelgaz Group has passed, as well as the missions entrusted to it, has been inaugurated at the headquarters of Sonelgaz's general management. The digital gallery includes a series of models, videos, documents, and equipment tracing the history of the group since its creation and highlighting its progress and subsidiaries. In his speech on the occasion, the Minister of Energy and Mines highlighted the efforts made by Sonelgaz since its creation on 28 July 1969, ensuring public service through the production and distribution of electricity and gas. The Minister of Energy and Mines, Mohamed Arkab, has received the Ambassador of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam to Algiers, Truong Quoc Hang, with whom he examined ways of strengthening cooperation between the two countries in various areas of the sector, according to a press release from the ministry. During the meeting, the two parties discussed cooperation relations between the two countries and the prospects for strengthening them in the fields of energy and mining. And And to wind up our program, the Minister of Finance, Laziz Fayed, has urged all bank managers to focus on the most innovative technologies in the digitization of banking services and products, said a statement from the ministry. These guidelines were laid down at a high-level meeting between representatives of the banking sector and the Ministry of Finance. It provided an opportunity to take stock of the implementation of the resolutions of the general meetings of public banks, notably with regard to information systems, the diversification of electronic means of payment, as well as the implementation of performance contracts. And with this, we come to the end of our weekly program devoted to Algerian economic news. Goodbye.
Welcome to our program devoted today to one of Algeria's most celebrated artists, namely late Beya Mhiddine. She is famous for the iconic work that would inspire Picasso to paint a collection called Women of Algeria. And as a self-taught artist, Beya retained the connection to tribal art that so fascinated the Western world and actively rejected any form of classification, instead drawing on personal memories and experiences. Born in Algeria in 1931, Beya's life was far from easy. Orphaned at the age of 5, she was raised by her grandmother. Unable to attend school, she worked as a servant for a French woman named Marguerite Camina, who would later be described by the artist as her adoptive mother. Camina noticed the talent that her young servant displayed in making figures from clay and encouraged her to develop her craft. Instead of following the typically Western models of art production that were being taught at the time, the young Beya drew on her own personal experiences and imaginings alongside the traditional tribal art of Algeria. Algeria's visual culture is described as boasting intricately designed traditional textiles, ceramics, gardens, and architecture, and these motifs reoccur in Beya Mhiddine's paintings. Her clay figures are said to have inspired the fluid forms and figures she painted, giving her works their unique aesthetic that was so influential to artists such as Picasso and Matisse. By the time she was 16, Mhiddine had her first exhibition in Paris. This is where her influence on artists such as Picasso is first noted. Picasso's interest and fascination with African tribal art and masks in particular is well known. His graphic cubist style is attributed in part to his curiosity in traditional African forms of representation, at that time presented in Europe in the form of curios and artifacts rather than artworks. Mhiddine was an exception to this. She was not creating tribal curiosities, but allowing her environment and imagination to shape her work. Inspired by her spontaneity and natural talent, Picasso invited her to work with him in 1948. She was the elusive untaught artist that gave Picasso fresh perspective. Picasso's Women of Algeria series is said to be inspired by Mhiddine, although it was painted after the time spent working together. Just as the young Mhiddine's influence on Picasso is evident, his influence is felt in many of her works. According to some art experts, Picasso nurtured Baya's aesthetic, particularly her use of color and line, while Baya's cultural vitality served as creative lifeblood for Picasso. Like Picasso, André Breton was greatly inspired by Baya's work. He found the bold colors and strange figures of her works revealed surrealistic and dreamlike qualities. He defined her work as surrealism, and this view was widely held for a long time. Modernist critics used the surrealistic ideas of dreamlike figures and the fascination with naive art as a lens through which to view Muhyiddin's work. This mindset is attributed to the problematic viewpoints at the time, which were dominated by Orientalism of the world that Baya, the woman and artist, came from. But the artist refused to define herself using the terminology of the Western canon. She created work that was deeply personal, rooted in her childhood and her home. As Sana Mahul asks in her research paper on the artist, why do we have to define and categorize artwork from non-Western cultures by imposing on them Western definitions and terminology? Baya married celebrated Andalusian composer Muhyiddin Mahfoud in 1953. He is credited with inspiring many of the instruments that appear in her works, as well as what many people see as the melodious and harmonious atmosphere that her works seems to evoke. 1 year following her marriage to Mahfoud, Baya stopped painting, only returning to her artistic practice in the late 60s. The reason attributed to this break varies. Some say it was to show solidarity with the revolution in Algeria, and others that it was to raise her children. Whatever her reasons, the interruption was temporary. From the 1960s on, she continued to create works until the end of her life. Her rich, opulent paintings combine influences of traditional Algerian art like ceramics and bold wall murals with flowing figures and objects. Birds and animals combine with objects like instruments and fruit to create works that seem to be laden with symbolic meaning. Her pieces don't follow any rules, continually denying the classifications forced onto them. In the late 90s, nearing the end of her successful artistic career, Baya, amongst many Algerian artists that the French colonizers attempted to ascribe to French culture, but instead she credited for resolutely proclaiming her Algerian identity, evidenced by her refusal to leave the country during political instability, despite an invitation from France. Braving political and social instability, Baya could not bear to leave the home that had inspired her joyous paintings. She was an Algerian artist at heart, clearly the only personal and artistic classification she was happy with. She died in 1998 and remains a celebrated artistic figure around the world.
is the capital city of Algeria. The city is rich in Algerian tradition and history, with numerous monuments, museums, historical buildings, and other places of interest for tourists to visit. One of the fascinating sites to visit in Algiers is the ancient Kechaoua Mosque. Situated in the Kasbah of Algiers, the Kechaoua Mosque has a long and interesting history. During the rule of the Ottoman Empire, the Kechaoua Mosque was strategically placed at the center of the city, at the point where the roads from the lower Kasbah led out to the 5 gates of the city. This was a district that contained grand family palaces owned by the wealthy and influential political and commercial figures of the Ottoman Regency. During the 16th and